It was in the latter part of October in the year 1889 that a case of singular complexity and sinister colour came under my observation, a case which for long years I refrained from placing before the public for fear of wounding the sensibilities of certain persons who were deeply concerned in it. On the particular morning a raw wind drifted the London fog against our windows in Baker Street, and a dull light struggled through the yellow curtain that hung above the street. Holmes had already breakfasted and was stretched at length upon the sofa, his long thin form coiled like some great cat, while his keen eyes were half closed and his fingers played with an extinguished pipe which he had not yet troubled to fill. I had just laid aside the newspaper whose dreary record of petty crime and political wrangling offered little to amuse when the sharp note of our bell rang through the house.
"Sir, there is a gentleman to see you who seems sadly agitated, and he begs that you will grant him an interview at once."
"Show him in, Mrs. Hudson, and be so good as to bring another log for the fire, for our visitor will be the better for a little warmth."
A moment later our landlady ushered into the room a man of middle height, broad about the shoulders, with roughened hands, a beard already flecked with grey, and a certain sturdy respectability in his bearing, which sat strangely upon the look of distress that clouded his honest features. His clothes were those of a provincial tradesman, brushed with scrupulous care yet betraying long service, and his boots were still dusty with the grime of travel.
"Mr. Holmes, sir, I take it, and you would be Dr. Watson, if I am rightly informed, and I crave your pardon for intruding upon you in this fashion."
"You are very welcome, Mr. Josiah Pike of Marshcombe in Cornwall, and I trust that you have not risen from your seat in the third-class carriage since Paddington, for it would have been wasted trouble."
The man stared at Holmes with parted lips, and his large work-hardened hands tightened upon the shapeless hat which he had been twisting nervously since he entered.
"You have the right of my name and count it, sir, and I came up by the early train, but how in all conscience you can tell that I sat in the third class is beyond my poor understanding."
"The ticket protruding from your pocket bears the colour of that class, the coal dust upon your left sleeve speaks of a draught from an open window near the engine, and the red clay upon your boots is of a kind I have observed only in that portion of Cornwall in which the Blackstone tin mine lies. So pray sit down, and tell us calmly what trouble has driven you to Baker Street."
Our visitor sank into the armchair, which I placed for him near the fire, and for some moments he could do nothing but pass his hand across his brow, as though to sweep away the confusion of his mind.
"It is ruin, sir, utter ruin and disgrace, and worse than ruin, for they would clap me in jail as a cheat and a villain, when God knows I never wronged man, woman or child in my life, and now they call me bigamist and thief in one breath."
Holmes shot one of his swift glances at me, and I saw that the strange combination of accusations had stirred his interest as no ordinary tale of theft could have done.
"You speak of being called a bigamist and a thief, Mr. Pike, and those are ugly words in any man's mouth, so let us, if you please, take the matter in its order, and begin at the point at which you perceive your misfortunes to have truly commenced."
"My name is Josiah Pike, sir, and I keep the general shop and post office in the village of Marshcombe that lies under the shadow of the Blackstone mine, and for 15 years there is not a soul in the parish who would not have said that I bore a fair name. I am a widow of 7 years, and I was left with a small business, a decent repute, and little else, and I strove hard to make an honest living amongst the miners and their families who have long been my customers. In addition to the shop I act without salary save a small gratuity as treasurer to the Blackstone Miners' Benefit Fund, which holds the savings of the men against sickness and disaster, and the money of those poor fellows has passed through my hands for nigh on 10 years without one penny of it ever going astray."
The man spoke with a sturdy pride which had in it something pathetic when contrasted with the trembling of his lips and the moisture that shone in his eyes.
"Pray continue, Mr. Pike, and tell us how a man with such a record comes to stand in fear of the law."
"There came into our village, some 5 years ago, a young lady by the name of Miss Emily Cartwright, who was the only child of the late manager of the mine, and who inherited from him a fair competence and certain shares in the concern. She was gentle-bred, sir, and yet she bore herself kindly towards those beneath her, and she would often come into my shop to purchase small things and to inquire after the families of the men who had served under her father. From such beginnings it came about that we grew into something nearer friendship than is usual betwixt lady and tradesman, and my foolish heart, warmed by her gracious ways, went further still, so that at last I ventured to think that, though she was above me in station, I might yet make her a good and honest husband.
As he uttered these words, the colour deepened in his weather-beaten face, and he cast a shamefaced glance at Holmes, as though half expecting a smile at his presumption.
There is no folly in an honest attachment, Mr. Pike, and many a union has been happier for being founded upon respect and character rather than upon empty rank. So pray set aside all thought of our judgment, and tell the plain truth as you know it.
I thank you, sir, for that word, for it has been flung in my teeth of late that I was aiming at a lady far above me, yet I had it in my mind that she had no near kin save a cousin in London, and that a steady man with a good name might in time win what a gentleman with idle habits would squander. Be that as it may, I spoke at last, and though she did not give me her hand, she did not take offence, and there were weeks and months after that when it seemed to me that her manner grew softer and that she lent a willing ear to my suit.
Holmes had drawn himself a little more upright upon the sofa, and his steely eyes were fastened upon our visitor's face with an expression which showed that he missed no shade of feeling that passed over it.
Then misfortune came, sir, and it came in such a shape that the devil himself could scarce have contrived it more cunningly, for now they say that I pretended to marry the lady while having a lawful wife still living, and that I laid hands upon her money and upon that of the miners in one act of wicked fraud.
Those are indeed grave charges, and you would be wise to be very exact in your statement of the facts which support or refute them.
First there is talk in the village that I have a wife in Plymouth whom I cruelly deserted. Then they bring forward a marriage entry in the parish register at Marshcombe where my name and that of Miss Cartwright are written as though we had been joined in lawful wedlock by special licence. And finally they show accounts and receipts which make it seem that I withdrew a large sum from the benefit fund at the very time when I was urging the lady to place her capital in my hands.
He flung out his hands in an impotent gesture of despair, and his voice broke upon the last words.
And you, sir, in the most absolute manner that you have no living wife, that you never received one penny of Miss Cartwright's money, and that you have not misappropriated the funds of the miners.
As God hears me, sir, I swear that every word of that is true, and that if the books and papers say otherwise they have been tampered with by some hand more cunning than mine.
You spoke when you entered a ruin and disgrace, but you spoke also of something more sinister, for you used a word which has no place in sober law and account books. You spoke of a curse.
Aye, sir, they say down our way that it is all the work of the pit devil, and the women will cross themselves if you so much as name it, and there are men who will not go within 100 yards of the old shaft after dark for fear of it.
Holmes's nostrils quivered slightly at this introduction of the fantastic into what had hitherto been a prosaic recital, and he motioned impatiently with his hand.
You will oblige me, Mr. Pike, by giving us a precise account of this pit devil in so far as it bears upon your case, for the law makes small account of devils, yet men may work much under their name.
It was 3 months ago that some of the men, driving a new gallery off the old Blackstone shaft, broke into a little pocket in the rock where they found a queer carved thing of green stone that looked to them like no Christian image, with staring eyes and a twisted mouth that put them in mind of tales they had heard from sailors. One of them brought it up, and there was much foolish talk that very night in my shop, the men crowding about the counter to look at it, and at last it was left with me, some saying that I should lock it away, and others that it would draw customers as a curiosity in the window. From that day forward every mischance in the village was laid at the door of the pit devil, and if a child fell sick or a horse went lame, there were those who said that I had no business to harbour such an unholy thing upon honest premises.
The man's voice had sunk as he spoke of the idol, and there was a furtive glance in his eye as though he half shared the fears which he professed to deride.
Then one night the thing was gone from my window, and there was a rare to do about it, and some said that I had sold it secretly, but I swear I never set eyes upon it again until they found it lying by the mouth of the old shaft, on the very night that Mr. Hugh Penrith was all but killed by a fall of rock.
Mr. Hugh Penrith is, I take it, connected with Miss Cartwright.
He is her guardian, sir, and foreman of the mine as her father was before him, and he has the ruling of most that is done in Marshcombe, so that if he believes a man guilty of wrong he can make the village a hard place for that man to live in.
It was plain that in the mind of our visitor this powerful foreman loomed as a very real and formidable personage.
So upon the night that Mr. Penrith narrowly escaped death in the shaft, the idol which had once been in your shop was found near the place of the accident, and from that circumstance a people have fashioned for themselves a story in which you and your supposed crimes are bound up with a curse from the pit.
They say the devil will have his due, sir, and that the idol marks those at whom the curse is levelled, and there are some who whisper that I set the thing there myself so that harm might come to the man who had spoken hard words of me.
We will leave the devil for the moment and return to the marriage and the money, for it is there that the hand of man is most plainly seen, and I presume that the lady herself now believes you to have wronged her most cruelly.
She will not see me, sir, and she has placed in the hands of the law the letters that I wrote to her, which, when read in the order in which she believes she received them, show me to have courted her only that I might lay hold of her fortune and the poor miner's savings together.
Holmes rose from the sofa, and, crossing to his desk, he took up his old notebook and a pencil, for he had the air of a man who perceives a line of inquiry and fears lest a single fact should slip from his grasp.
You have brought those letters, the accounts of the benefit fund, and any documents relating to the supposed marriage and to the discovery of the idol. I hope, for without them we work in the dark.
I have here a packet that holds all that I could lay hands upon before the train started, and there are other books at the mine office that I could not get, for Mr. Vane the cashier keeps them close at present.
At the mention of the cashier's name, Holmes's eyelids drooped for a moment and then lifted again with a flash of keen attention.
Mr. Vane, you say, is the cashier of the mine and has the handling of the accounts both of the company and of the benefit fund.
That is so, sir, and he is a young gentleman out of Truro, very neat in his dress and exact with his figures, or so they say, though God knows his books look strange enough to me now.
You will leave this packet with me, Mr. Pike, and you will return to Marshcombe by the afternoon train, conducting yourself in all ways as a man conscious of his own innocence, for you may safely leave the rest in our hands.
Then you will come, sir, and you believe that there is some hope that the truth may be shown and that I may yet hold up my head before my neighbours.
I never yet met a case in which the truth could not be reached by those who sought it with patience and with method, and in this matter we have the great advantage that the facts are already, so to speak, upon the table, though they may at present be in a sadly disordered state.
Our visitor wrung Holmes's hand with a gratitude that he could not utter, and a few moments later we heard his heavy tread descending the stair and the closing of the street door behind him.
Holmes had already seated himself at the table and was untying the string which bound the warm brown packet that Pike had left.
Come, Watson, let us see whether this provincial whirlwind has indeed left us any solid material to work upon, or whether all is mist and vapour as some of your favourite romantic writers might prefer.
I drew my chair beside him, and together we examined the contents of the packet, which consisted chiefly of letters in a delicate feminine hand, a few in a clumsy script, which I recognised as Pike's, a folded sheet torn from what appeared to be a parish register, and certain memoranda and receipts relating to the benefit fund. Holmes did not at the time comment upon what he read, but his thin lips tightened, and a light of cold amusement flickered in his eyes when he came upon the marriage entry squeezed as it was between two earlier lines in a cramped and different hand. When at last he had laid the final paper aside, he rose with decision and thrust the whole collection into his dispatch case.
Pack your bag, Watson, for we go down to Cornwall by the midday train, and I think you will find that the air of the moors will be more stimulating to your literary sense than the atmosphere of Baker Street.
An hour later, we were rattling westward from Paddington. Holmes stretched once more in the corner of the carriage, his lean profile cut in sharp relief against the fog-stained window, while I amused myself by speculating upon the possible bearing of the idol and the alleged bigamy upon the more solid matter of embezzlement. The long journey wore away, and as the train bore us ever further from the murky roofs of London, the air grew clearer, the hedgerows greener, and at last the grey line of the Cornish cliffs rose against a sky already flushing with the hues of evening. We descended at a small junction, took a slow branch line, and finally found ourselves in a primitive station, where a single porter, a pile of tin ore, and a patient horse and trap constituted the chief objects of interest. Pike awaited us though with an anxious face, and after a few words of greeting he drove us along a winding lane, past scattered cottages and black mounds of waste, until the gaunt headgear and buildings of the Blackstone mine loomed up with the village of Marshcombe huddled at its feet. A raw wind swept over the open ground and whistled amongst the telegraph wires, and I could well believe that the simple folk who dwelt in that bleak spot might be prone to people its shadows with shapes of terror.
If it pleases you, gentlemen, I would first bring you to my poor place, where you can take some food after your journey, and then I will wait upon your orders as to whom you would see and what books you would wish to examine.
We will not refuse your hospitality, Mr. Pike, for we have eaten nothing since morning, but afterwards I should desire to visit the lady whose name is so unhappily connected with your own, and to see also the foreman who has, it appears, narrowly escaped the malice of man or of fate in the old shaft.
The shop and dwelling of Josiah Pike stood at the corner of the little square which formed the heart of Marshcombe, its bow window filled with a heterogeneous display of groceries, gaudy tins, coils of rope, and cheap finery, while above the door the modest legend of post office was painted in white letters upon a board. Within, the place was neat and orderly, with shelves well stocked, a small writing desk in one corner, and beyond a door which led to the parlour where Pike's simple meal was laid in readiness. Holmes's quick eye missed nothing, and I saw him glance more than once at a bare square upon the smoke-darkened wall, where the dust showed clearly that some framed object had lately stood.
You have, I think, removed a picture or some such article from the place, Mr. Pike, and I should be glad to know upon what day it was taken down and for what reason.
It was a cheap print of the Queen, sir, and I took it down to make room for a framed set of rules of the benefit fund that Mr. Vane wished to hand there, but he has not yet brought them as he promised.
Holmes nodded curtly, but I could see that the answer had increased rather than diminished his interest in that particular patch of wall.
When we had eaten, Pike harnessed his horse once more and drove us up a rising road that led away from the mine towards a more secluded part of the village, where stood a square stone house, somewhat larger and more pretentious than its neighbours.
This is the house where Miss Cartwright resides, gentlemen, and Mr. Penrith also when he is not at the mine, and I will wait in the road while you make your visit, for I doubt she would not relish the sight of me upon her doorstep.
A maid admitted us, and, upon Holmes's card being sent in, we were speedily shown into a sitting room where, by the window, there rose to greet us a young lady in deep mourning, with a face which, though pale and somewhat drawn, bore the stamp of gentle birth and of a nature both sensitive and resolute.
You are, I think, Mr. Sherlock Holmes of London, and this is Dr. Watson, and you have come at the request of Mr. Pike, concerning whose conduct I have already been compelled to take grave steps.
We are indeed here, Mr. Pike's instance, Miss Cartwright, but we are not his advocates except in so far as we seek the truth, and it is only in the cause of truth that I would ask you to repeat, for our private hearing, your own impression of the events which have of late so unhappily disturbed this peaceful village.
I am quite ready to speak, Mr. Holmes, for my name has been cruelly coupled with that of a man whom I now believe to be guilty both of treachery and of fraud, and if by any further explanation I can assist the law to do its duty, I shall not shrink from it. I came to Marshcombe after my father's death, with little knowledge of the world, and with a sincere desire to devote myself to the welfare of those among whom his work had been done, and in that spirit I accepted the friendly offices of Mr. Pike, who had long been known to my family. He was at first respectful and distant, but little by little his manner altered, and he spoke more freely, so that at last he addressed me in a way which could not be misunderstood, and I confess that for a time I did not discourage him so much as perhaps I ought to have done. It is bitter to me now to recall that weakness, for I am persuaded that he saw in me not a woman to be loved for herself, but a convenient instrument for covering certain deficits in the accounts which he held.
You have no near relative residing with you, Miss Cartwright, but there is a guardian who acts in your interest.
Mr. Hugh Penrith, the foreman of the mine, was appointed by my father to act for me until such time as I should marry or otherwise dispose of the property, and he has ever behaved towards me with a rough, but honest kindness, though he has never wholly trusted Mr. Pike. It was he who first warned me that there were rumours of irregularities in the benefit fund, and who urged me to place all my affairs in his hands rather than leave them with a tradesman whose position might tempt him beyond his strength.
Nevertheless, you continued to receive Mr. Pike and to permit his addresses.
I was foolish and vain, I suppose, for it flattered me that a man reputed for steadiness and honour should desire me, and I told myself that Mr. Penrith was prejudiced, though his blunt words wounded me, and so matters stood until these letters convinced me that I had been made the tool of a designing man.
These are the letters which you have placed in the hands of the law and of which I have already seen copies.
The originals are here in this drawer, Mr. Holmes, for I thought you might ask to examine them again, and they are arranged in the order in which I received them, from the first respectful note to the last urgent appeal that I would consent to a marriage and to a certain investment which he pressed upon me.
Holmes took the packet which she handed him, but instead of opening it at once he regarded her with that grave courtesy which he could assume at will.
You will greatly oblige me, Miss Cartwright, if you can also recall with some exactness the dates upon which you received any letters in which he spoke of money matters or of the benefit fund, and whether those dates coincided with any particular events in the village, such as meetings, accidents, or rumours connected with the mine.
It is hard to be precise, sir, but I remember that he first spoke in a letter of uniting my capital with that of the miners at a time when certain repairs were needed to the machinery, and when Mr. Vane, the cashier, had warned me that further calls might be made upon the shareholders. Shortly afterwards came the discovery that a large sum was missing from the benefit fund, and at the same time I began to hear in whispers that Mr. Pike had been seen in Plymouth in company with a woman who claimed to be his wife, and that he had abandoned her in poverty years ago. It was then that I broke off all communication with him and placed the letters and all that related to the matter in Mr. Penrith's hands, and from him they have passed to the authorities.
You have done all that a woman of spirit and of honour could do in such a situation, Miss Cartwright, and I will not trouble you with further questions at present, but I may have occasion to ask you at a later time to reconsider with me the order in which certain of these events occurred.
You are at liberty to examine everything that concerns me, Mr. Holmes, for I desire nothing now so much as that the truth should be made manifest, and I would far rather learn that I have been mistaken in my judgment than live in the belief that I have been basely wronged.
With that brave declaration, the young lady bowed us out, and as we passed down the path I could not but feel a profound compassion for one whose pride and affection had alike been so cruelly wounded. From the house of Miss Cartwright we made our way to a low building at the edge of the mine yard, where Pike informed us that the mining office and the cashier's room was situated.
Mr. Vane will most like be within, gentlemen, for he keeps close to his books these days, and there has been much talk of audits and accounts since the shortages were first spoken of.
We entered a bare outer office, where a clerk sat at a desk, and beyond was a glass door through which we could see a smaller room with shelves of ledgers and a tall stooping figure bending over a table. At our knock the man looked up, revealing a pale face with thin lips and a pair of restless grey eyes that shifted quickly from Holmes to myself and then to Pike.
You are Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume, and this is Dr. Watson, and you have come in connection with the unpleasant matter of the benefit fund and the charges against Mr. Pike.
I am indeed Mr. Holmes, and I desire, with your permission, to examine the books of the fund and such other records as bear upon its recent transactions, for I am informed that you, Mr. Charles Vane, have long had the keeping of them.
It will give me much satisfaction, sir, to place everything at your disposal, for no one can deplore more than I do the cloud which has fallen upon this place, and I am convinced that the fullest light can only show that I have done my duty with exactitude.
There was in his manner a nervous eagerness, which might have been due to wounded honour or to something less creditable, and I saw Holmes regard him for a moment with an expression that was almost pitying. The ledgers and minute books were brought forth, and for the next hour Holmes sat turning their pages, asking now a sharp question upon some entry, and now merely penciling a note upon the cuff of his shirt. More than once he asked to see the minute book of the benefit fund, and at last he requested that it might remain in his possession for a day, the request which Vane granted, though with a certain reluctance which he strove unsuccessfully to conceal.
You will, I hope, be at liberty this evening, Mr. Vane, for I may have some further questions to put to you, and there is also the matter of the old shaft and the idol, which has so greatly disturbed the minds of your people.
I am at your service, sir, though I cannot conceive what bearing that grotesque toy can have upon the solid facts of the case, for my own belief is that a vulgar fraud and a piece of shameful bigamy are at the bottom of it, and nothing more.
The scorn in his tone when he spoke of bigamy did not escape me, nor did it escape Holmes, whose lips curved for an instant in a cold smile.
From the office we walked down towards the mine yard, where the headgear of the old shaft rose black and gaunt against the evening sky, and the chill wind that swept across the open ground carried with it the dull clang of machinery from the newer workings. A knot of men stood near the mouth of the disused shaft, their rough faces grave, and their eyes turning with a kind of awe towards a dark opening in the ground from which a faint odour of damp earth arose.
This be the place, gentlemen, where the master was all but done for night afore last, and some say it was no natural fall of stone that came down upon him.
The man who spoke was of great frame, with grizzled hair, and a face cut and seamed with the marks of toil and exposure, and I guess that this must be Hugh Penrith, the foreman whose rugged figure had bulked so largely in Pike's narrative.
You're Mr. Penrith, I take it, and I am heartily glad to see that the injuries you have sustained do not prevent you from walking thus far, though perhaps you would do well not to venture too near the edge.
I thought I had as good as done with walking, so when that cursed stuff came down, but the doctor says my ribs are no worse than if a horse had kicked me, and a foreman that stays abed while there is talk of devils about his mine would ill deserve the name. There are those who think that image they found down there has brought a curse, and more than one has said that it marked me for death when it was set on the very stone that broke loose over my head.
You saw someone near the shaft that night, I understand, then you spoke of a dark figure and a light that seemed to dance at the brink.
I had gone out to see that the place was safe, for we had heard lads had been playing there, and as I came over the rise I saw a lantern in the gloom and a shape bending as if to set something down, and when I shouted the light swung and the shape moved back, and at the moment the stone went with a roar and I was flung down like a ninepin.
He spoke without exaggeration, like a man stating plain facts, and I could well picture the sudden crash and the whirl of dust that must have filled the lonely spot in the dark.
And afterwards the idol was discovered lying near the mouth of the shaft, so that those who already feared it believed that it had been the instrument of your destruction.
They found it on the very stone where I saw the shadow set something, and they brought it to me where I lay, and I told them to fling the devilish thing back into the pit, but they were feared, and it lies now in the office for them as has a fancy for such.
Holmes stepped nearer to the lip of the shaft and peered down into the blackness, while I followed more cautiously, for the broken rock and crumbling edges gave little assurance of safety. He measured with his eye the distance from the spot where we stood to a ledge a little below, and then he turned away with a satisfied nod.
I shall ask you, Mr. Penrith, to be present here later this evening, together with such of the men as have courage to stand by, for I propose to make a small experiment which may throw some light upon the figure you saw and upon the supposed malice of the idol.
You will find men ready enough to stand with you, sir, for though they talk of curses they have stout hearts, and there are few in Marshcombe that would not like to see this matter cleared up one way or t'other.
As we turned back towards the village, a small, dapper figure in a frock coat and bowler hat came briskly across the yard, twirling a cane, and wearing upon his thin face an expression of ill-concealed importance.
Ah, Mr. Holmes, I had a telegram saying that you had been called in, and I am bound to say that I was a trifle surprised, for I had thought that even your ingenuity could scarcely find a mystery where the evidence is so simple and so conclusive.
Good evening, Lestrade, and I am delighted to learn that you find yourself so comfortably at home in the complexities of provincial finance and of feminine sentiment, for I confess that to me the matter has certain puzzling features.
The only puzzling feature to my mind is that the law has not already laid its hand upon that fellow Pike, for when a man has one wife in Plymouth and another in Prospect here and has at the same time the handling of other folks' money, it does not require consulting detectives to tell you what is likely to happen.
You have, I see, taken the trouble to satisfy yourself upon the Plymouth point, and you have perhaps even prepared a warrant which only awaits a signature.
There is no harm in being ready, Mr. Holmes, and I have seen enough of bigamy cases to know their smell when I come across it, so unless you can show me something very different from what I have heard today, I fancy your client will sleep behind bars before the week is out.
My clients rarely end behind bars, Lestrade, and I have a notion that if you will bring your ready-made theories to the inn parlour at 10 tonight, you may find some small addition to them, which will interest you.
I shall be there, never fear, for I am always willing to hear what you have to say, though on this occasion I venture to think that the result will be to bring you round to my view of the matter.
With this parting shot, the little inspector strutted off towards the mine office where, no doubt, he proposed to impress his importance upon the unfortunate Vane. Evening was already drawing in when we returned with Pike to his house, and Holmes, after a hasty meal, spread upon the parlour table all the letters, books, and papers which he had gathered, lighting 2 candles that he might examine them the more closely. I watched him as he bent over them, his hawk-like profile thrown into strong relief by the candle flame, his eyes glinting, as line after line revealed its secret to their marvellous intellect.
Here we have, Watson, not a new crime, but a new arrangement of old facts, even as a rogue of a card player may win many a trick not by adding cards to his hand, but by changing their order.
He laid in a row upon the table the letters which Miss Cartwright had sent, and I saw that he had resorted them not according to the numbers upon the envelopes, but according to the faint and half-obliterated postmarks which his keen eye had deciphered.
Observe, if you please, that this letter, which the lady placed near the end of the series because she believed she had received it late, is in truth weeks earlier than the respectful note which she thought came first, under the phrases which she has taken as proof of mercenary intention belonged to a time when marriage had not yet been spoken of between them.
It was indeed astonishing to see how the apparent progress of Pike's sentiments was changed when the letters were arranged in their true sequence, and how innocent phrases, when wrenched out of place, might take on a sinister meaning.
In the same manner, look at the minute book of the Benefit Fund, where the page which records a large withdrawal stands between 2 entries of a meeting held months apart, the page itself having clearly been lifted and reinserted, for you perceive that the colouring of its edge does not agree with that of its neighbours.
He compared the leaves with the minuteness which was so characteristic of him, and I could see plainly, when my attention was called to it, that the page did indeed bear signs of having been tampered with.
The receipt, which purports to show that a certain sum was paid over to a London agent on behalf of Miss Cartwright, is printed upon a form which was not issued until a year after the date written upon it, a fact which I ascertained before leaving town by telegram to the printers, whose name appears at the foot.
Holmes drew from his pocket a folded slip which bore the answer to his inquiry, and the contradiction between the printed number upon the receipt and the information given in the reply left no doubt as to the fraud.
We have, then, letters whose order has been disturbed, entries that have been inserted out of their time, and receipts that bear a false date, and all these variations from the natural course of events converge upon one result, which is to create against Josiah Pike a chain of circumstantial evidence that never in fact existed.
I began dimly to perceive the drift of his reasoning, and I confess that a thrill of admiration ran through me as I saw how he plucked the heart out of the tangled mass of facts.
The hand that has done this, Watson, is not that of the rough-handed shopkeeper, but of a man accustomed to figures, to dates, to the delicate manipulation of paper records, a man who stands to lose much by an honest audit and to gain everything by directing suspicion towards a more obvious victim.
The name of Vane sprang to my lips, but I bit them shut, for I knew Holmes's dislike of premature conclusions.
We will now, if you please, keep our appointment at the shaft, for I would not that our friend the pit devil should be kept waiting, since he has already taken a somewhat prominent part in the drama, though like many another devil, he is in truth a very harmless creature.
The night had fallen dark and thick, with only a few stars peering through ragged clouds, when we made our way once more to the old shaft, accompanied by Pike, Penrith, and a dozen stalwart miners, while Lestrade, with his inevitable notebook, hovered at our heels. Holmes had brought with him a dark lantern and a length of rope, and he gave certain directions in a low voice to two of the men, who at once took up stations on either side of the opening.
You, Penrith, will stand where you were upon the night of your mishap, as nearly as you can recall the exact position, and you, Pike, will remain here by me, for I would have you see with your own eyes what others have seen and misinterpreted.
The wind moaned over the open ground, and the dim light of the lantern made little impression upon the black moor of the shaft, while the faces of the men glimmered whitely out of the gloom.
Now, Watson, I will trouble you to descend a few feet upon this rope to the ledge which you perceive there, and to hold the lantern in such a manner that your body makes a silhouette against the sky when viewed from the rise where Penrith stands.
Though I confess that I felt small relish for the task, I could not refuse, and with some difficulty I lowered myself to the narrow ledge, where I clung grimly, while Holmes above adjusted the rope to his satisfaction. At his whispered word I lifted the lantern and held it out before me, my figure, as I learned later, being thus thrown into sharp outline against the strip of sky beyond.
That is the very look of it, lads, as God is my witness, with the light swinging and the shape bending as if to lay something upon the stone. And if you have the devil image in that hand, it would be the very picture that is printed upon my mind.
From my precarious post I heard the murmur of voices, and presently Holmes drew up the rope and helped me once more to solid ground.
You perceive, Lestrade, how easily the imagination of a man half blinded by dust and pain could convert an ordinary human figure into some creature of malice, especially if he had already been filled with tales of a curse.
I do not deny that the accident may have been pure chance, Mr. Holmes, nor that the devil in question is more likely to be of flesh and blood than of stone, but it does not alter the fact that Pike had the image in his possession and that it was found here after his quarrel with the foreman.
On the contrary, it alters the fact very materially, for Pike never brought the idol here at all, and if you will meet me at the inn parlour at the hour I named, I shall hope to prove to you who did so and for what purpose.
With that promise we dispersed, the men straggling away in little knots, their low voices soon lost in the sign of the wind, while we returned with Pike to the village. At 10 o'clock that night the parlour of the small inn was filled, for besides Holmes and myself there were present Lestrade, Pike, Penrith, Vane, and Miss Cartwright, whom Holmes had persuaded to attend the final explanation, while the landlord and one or two of the principal miners lingered respectfully near the door. Upon the table were spread the letters, the minute book, the receipt, the torn sheet from the parish register, and placed somewhat to one side, the sinister little idol of green stone, whose staring eyes seemed to gleam in the lamplight.
We have here, ladies and gentlemen, a series of events which, when taken in one order, present a picture of a tradesman who, tempted by the possession of other men's money and allured by the fortune of a young lady, pretends to marry her, while having another wife alive embezzles the funds, and seeks even to compass the death of the man who stands between him and his object. We have the same events when taken in another order, and in the second arrangement they present the picture of a cashier who has for months been dipping his hand secretly into the fund, who finds himself in peril of detection, and he therefore rearranges the cards in such wise that the guilt appears to rest upon a man whose clumsy courtship and public position make him the natural target for suspicion.
There was a stir among those present, and I saw Lestrade lean forward with knit brows, while Vane's fingers played nervously with the watch chain upon his waistcoat.
First, let us take the matter of the supposed marriage, without which the charge of fraudulent intent against Pike would lose much of its colour, for a treasurer who misappropriates money is a rogue, but a man who does so under cover of a sham marriage is a scoundrel of a deeper dye. Miss Cartwright has done us the honour to bring the original entry from the parish register, and you will observe that it is thrust between two lines belonging to an earlier date, and that the ink, when examined under a lens, shows none of that corrosion which time has produced upon the writing above and below.
He held up the torn sheet, and even to my untrained eye the difference in colour between the cramped insertion and the older entries was sufficiently apparent.
This entry was written not at the time, which it professes to record, but weeks later, when it became useful to a certain person that there should appear to have been a marriage in order to lend support to the theory of a fraud facilitated by matrimonial rites.
Then there was no marriage, and I am not bound to this man in any way, and all the shame I have felt has been but the ghost of a thing that never took place.
You are bound to no one Miss Cartwright, save by those ties of gratitude, and perhaps of contrition, which you may feel towards a man whom you are very naturally misjudged, for the ceremony in the church never passed beyond the form of a rehearsal, which the vicar himself refused to ratify until certain formalities should be observed.
A faint colour stole into her cheeks, and she cast a swift, penitent glance in the direction of Pike, who sat dumbfounded at this sudden reversal of his fortunes.
The forged entry was made by a hand which has clearly had practice in such work, which belongs to a person who had access both to the register and to those rumours of a rehearsal which were current in the village. We now pass to the letters, and here you will see, if you will follow them as I have arranged them, that the phrases which Miss Cartwright very naturally took as proof of mercenary design belong to an earlier stage of the acquaintance than those in which Pike expresses more personal feelings, so that what she believes to be a steady crescendo of love and cupidity is in truth a series of disconnected outbursts which have been shuffled like cards in a pack.
He ran rapidly through several of the letters, indicating the postmarks and the relation of these to certain village events, and it was astonishing to note how the whole moral aspect changed when the correspondence was restored to its true order.
I do not say that Mr. Pike was wise in the expressions he used, nor that a man of more delicate breeding would have written thus of a lady's capital, but I assert that the very clumsiness of his phrasing proves his honesty, for a practised swindler does not blurt out his designs in such bold language. We come next to the accounts of the benefit fund, where the discovery of a deficit coincides, according to the falsified dates, with the supposed marriage and with certain proposals made to Miss Cartwright. Yet when we restore the entries and receipts to their rightful places, we find that money was missing from the fund long before Pike's courtship had reached its critical point.
Lestrade frowned and tugged at his moustache, while Vane had grown very white and sat staring fixedly at the table.
The page which records a large withdrawal bears clear signs of having been lifted and reinserted. The receipt is printed on a later form than its written date implies, and the minutes of a meeting, which should have preceded the transaction, are in fact of a later time, so that the whole structure of apparent coincidence falls to pieces when examined. We have then established that there was no legal marriage, that the letters have been misarranged, and that the financial records have been tampered with, and there remains only to ask who had the knowledge, the opportunity, and the motive to perform this remarkable feat of chronological jugglery.
Holmes's voice had grown colder and more incisive with each sentence, and there was a pause now in which the ticking of the clock upon the mantelpiece sounded loud in the little room.
It was not Pike, who can barely add a column without counting upon his fingers, nor is it Miss Cartwright, who has no access to the mine office archives, no penwriter who can sign his name, and no more, and I do not greatly suspect that Lestrade has been experimenting in such refinement of fraud.
If you are coming to my door, Mr. Holmes, you will find it very stoutly barred, for I have no taste for the inside of a dock, and I have never yet forged a figure in my life.
No, Lestrade, the man we seek is one whose daily work consists in keeping accounts, in issuing receipts, in entering minutes, and in handling those very books whose pages have been disturbed.
Every eye in the room turned as though drawn by a magnet towards the slight figure of the cashier, and I saw his lips move as if to frame some denial which would not come.
Mr. Charles Vane, you have for long enjoyed the confidence of this company and of these men, but you have also for long enjoyed the questionable hospitality of the gaming table in Truro, as my inquiries have shown, and the two pleasures have proved too costly to support each other.
That is a lie, Mr. Holmes, and I will not sit here to be slandered in this way, for I have done no wrong beyond an occasional evening's amusement such as many a gentleman permits himself.
The gentlemen who permit themselves such amusement are not all in charge of the savings of 100 miners, Mr. Vane, nor do they all send to London for printed receipts a year before the printers issue them, which is a miracle that you alone appear to have performed.
A murmur ran round the room, and I saw Penrith's great hands clench as though he could scarcely restrain himself from seizing the pale cashier.
You found that your losses of play had eaten into the fund to such an extent that discovery was imminent, and you cast about for some scapegoat upon whose shoulders you might place the burden, and Providence, or what you perhaps call the devil, placed in your way the very man and the very superstition you required. Pike's gauche attentions to Miss Cartwright were the talk of the village. The rehearsal in the church gave you the material for a forged entry. The letters, which passed through your hands in the post office, offered you the means of rearranging their order, and the fears of the miners concerning the idol allowed you to weave around the whole a cloak of supernatural terror.
You cannot prove that I laid a finger on that accursed image, and you cannot prove that I touched the register of the minute book, for there is no one who saw me do it.
On the contrary, there is one witness whose testimony is beyond dispute, and that witness is the dust upon the wall of Pike's shop, where you removed a framed picture in order to conceal behind it the very page you had torn from the minute book after altering it to your liking.
With a gesture of triumph, Holmes drew from his case a folded sheet, which I recognised as that same page, and he laid it upon the table beside the existing entry so that all could see the differences between them.
I obtained this by the simple method of observing that the dust mark indicated the recent removal of a frame, and that the man most interested in hiding a document would choose the safest place within reach, which in this instance chanced to be behind a representation of Her Majesty, whose venerable features would not lightly be disturbed by the eye of suspicion. As for the idol, you took it from Pike's window under the pretext of wishing to place it in the company's collection. You carried it to the shaft upon the evening when you meant to end your troubles by ending your life, and when your courage failed you and you merely dislodged the stone, which so nearly killed Penrith, you left the thing lying there, hoping that its discovery would add another thread to the web you had spun around Pike.
The atmosphere in the room had become tense to the point of suffocation, and Vane's face was now of a ghastly pallor, the beads of sweat standing upon his brow.
Your final hope lay in flight, but when you found that Lestrade's warrant had not yet been signed, and that Pike himself had gone to London for aid, you feared that some question might be asked which your flimsy fabric of evidence could not bear, and you have since that hour lived in such terror that your hand shakes when you add a column.
It is all very clever, Mr. Holmes, but I say again that you cannot take a man's liberty upon such fanciful constructions, for there is no direct proof that I ever handled those papers, or that I ever set foot near the shaft on at night.
You forget the missing half-sovereign, which you dropped there, Mr. Vane, the coin, which bears upon its milled edge a nick that corresponds exactly with the mark upon your watch chain, where it caught last year, as I learned from the landlord, who remembers how you laughed over it, and that coin now lies in the hand of Inspector Lestrade, who picked it up at my direction from the ledge, which you alone could have reached.
Vane gave a choking cry, and his hand went up convulsively to his chain, as though to assure himself of the defect which he had supposed to be known only to himself and to a gossiping landlord.
I have the coin here, Mr. Holmes, and I will swear that I picked it up where you indicated near the shaft, and I am ready to swear also that I have now heard enough to justify me in laying my hand upon this gentleman. Charles Vane, I arrest you on the charge of embezzling the funds of the Blackstone Miners' Benefit Society and of forging accounts and entries with the intent to throw suspicion upon an innocent man, and whatever you say will be taken down and may be used in evidence against you.
I will say nothing, then, for your words and this man's inventions are enough to hang me without help from my own lips.
He sank back in his chair with a strange beaten look, and the resistance seemed to pass out of him, leaving only a dull despair where his nervous defiance had been.
Mr. Pike, I have wronged you cruelly by believing what I now see was a cunningly contrived falsehood, and if you can find it in your heart to forgive my haste and pride, I shall be grateful to you all my life.
There is nothing to forgive, miss, for it was natural that you should think as you did when everything pointed one way, and I am more rejoiced than I can say that you stand cleared of any share in this dreadful business.
There is many a lad in the pits who will sleep easier this night, knowing that their hard-earned savings are not gone for good, and there is many a fist that will be ready for that white-faced gentleman yonder if ever he is let loose again among us.
Holmes held up his hand with a gesture of authority, for the muttered exclamations of the miners had taken on a threatening tone.
The law will deal with Mr. Vane, and you will show best your manner by leaving the task to those whose office it is, contenting yourselves with seeing that your fund is placed in safer hands in future.
The little gathering broke up soon afterwards, Lestrade departing in charge of his prisoner, while Miss Cartwright, after exchanging a few low words with Pike, withdrew with eyes that were brighter than they had been when we first saw her that afternoon. When at last we found ourselves once more alone in the parlour of Pike's modest dwelling, he stood before Holmes with his rough hands opening and shutting in his emotion, as though he could find no words for the gratitude that struggled within him.
You have given me back my good name, sir, and that is worth more to me than all the money in the fund, and if ever there is a day when I can do the least service for you or for the doctor here, you have but to send word and you will find Josiah Pike ready.
You can best serve us, Mr. Pike, by taking warning from this experience that a man who meddles with matters beyond his understanding, such as legal forms and investments, is apt to find himself in deep water, and that when his feelings outrun his discretion, he does well to seek the counsel of a friend.
Early up on the following morning, we took leave of Marshcombe, whose bleak outlines I watched recede with a certain regret, for the place with its grim minehead and superstition-haunted shaft had woven itself strangely into my memory.
Holmes was unusually silent during our journey back to London, and it was not until we were once more in our familiar sitting room that he condescended to comment upon the case.
You see, Watson, how slight are the materials with which a clever rogue may work when he understands the weakness of human nature, for he added no new fact to the situation. He merely altered the order in which the existing facts were presented.
I could not but acknowledge the truth of his remark, for the whole edifice of suspicion had indeed rested upon a mere shifting of dates and papers, which yet had contrived to deceive even those who were most nearly concerned.
It is the same in many things, my dear fellow, for men accept the sequence in which events come to their notice as though it were the sequence in which they actually occurred, and they rarely trouble to ask themselves whether the order has not been arranged by some unseen hand.
With that philosophical observation, my friend relapsed into his habitual taciturnity, while I, for my part, resolved that when the time should at last come for me to lay before the public this strange affair of the cursed bridegroom, I would take care to set the facts in their true order, so that justice might be done not only in the courts, but in the minds of men.
And now, having at last related this untold case of Sherlock Holmes, I must turn for a moment from Baker Street and from the moors of Cornwall to address you who have listened so patiently to my narrative.
I thank you most sincerely for remaining with me until the final word of this story, for your quiet attention is to a humble chronicler the highest encouragement that he can desire. If this adventure has afforded you some measure of interest or diversion, I would ask you, as a small favour in return, to be so good as to indicate your approval by pressing the like button below this moving picture. Should you desire to accompany my friend Holmes and myself upon further investigations among the shadows of crime and the clear light of reason, I would earnestly invite you to subscribe to this channel, that you may be readily informed when a new chronicle is set before you. I should value it greatly if you would also leave a comment in which you tell us what aspects of the case most engaged your fancy, for such words from you to us as the talk by the fireside after a long day's work. If, moreover, you feel disposed to extend to our little enterprise a more material support, you will find that by the simple expedient of directing your gaze to the small square in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, or by following the link in the description beneath, you may make a contribution towards the continuance of these labours. In that same description, there are also links which will lead you to other works belonging to a wholly different series of tales, should your curiosity tempt you to explore beyond the confines of Baker Street for a while. For the present, I bid you a very cordial farewell, and I trust that you will join us again when next another untold case of Sherlock Holmes is brought forth from my dispatch box and laid before your attentive eyes and ears.